Hey guys, it's me King Diablo, and in today's video I'm going to review the character balance patch in Korea server. So first let's start with the striker class buff. So this is the first buff scale for striker class. The cooldown of the skill has been increased to 7 seconds and the PvP damage of the skill has also increased. Also a new flow has been added to the skill that does 250% skill damage of the skill, has super armor but it's not applied in arena and does knock up on successful hit. Also, if you use this flow while the passive skill effect is active, it deals an additional damage to your enemy equivalent to 3% of their maximum HP. And if this attack hits the enemy successfully, it will also recover your own HP equivalent to 3% of your maximum health points. These effects only work in PvP and not on monsters or bosses. It will also have frontal guard and super armor at the back right before the attack animation of the skill begins, but it's not applied in arena. This is the second buff scale for striker class. The movement distance and the attack speed of the scale has increased. Now let's see buccaneer class buff. This is the first buff skill for buccaneer class. This skill now does stun on first hit. This is the second buff scale for buccaneer class. The PvE and PvP damage of the scale has increased. This is the third buff scale for buccaneer class. The PvE and PvP damage of the scale has increased. This is the fourth buff scale for buccaneer class. The PvE and PvP damage of the scale has increased. This is the fifth buff scale for buccaneer class. The PvE and PvP damage of the scale has increased. The passive skill for buccaneer class has also been buffed. It now does not increase the PvP damage dealt by 10% for 10 seconds. Instead, it now increases the skill damage of all skills by 15% for 10 seconds. Now let's see kunoichi class buff. This is the first buff scale for kunoichi class. The PvE damage of this scale has increased. This is the second buff scale for kunoichi class. The PvE damage of the scale has increased. This is the third buff scale for kunoichi class. The PvE damage of the scale has increased. This is the fourth buff scale for kunoichi class. The PvE damage of the scale has increased. This is the fifth buff scale for kunoichi class. The PvE damage of the scale has increased. Now let's see Void Knight class buff. This is the buff scale for Void Knight class. This skill now does stun on first hit. Now let's see Paladin class buff. This is the buff scale for Paladin class. This skill now does knockback on successful hit. Now let's see archmage class buff. This is the first buff skill for archmage class. This skill now does stun on first hit. This is the second buff skill for archmage class. This skill now does knock down on successful hit instead of knock up on successful hit. Now let's see Titan class buff. This is the first buff skill for Titan class. This skill now does stun on first hit. This is the second buff skill for Titan class. This skill now does knock up on successful hit instead of bound on successful hit. Now let's see Archer class buff. This is the buff skill for Archer class. This skill now does stun on first hit. Now let's see Sura class buff. This is the buff skill for Sura class. This skill now does knock down on successful hit instead of stun on first hit and knock up on last hit. Now let's see Legatus class buff. This is the buff skill for Legatus class. This skill now does stun on first hit instead of daze on first hit. If you enjoyed this video, then don't forget to like, comment, subscribe and share. I will see you in the next video.